We can start with our first paper by Professor Lynne Rudder Baker. The chairperson for this session is Professor Josef Quitterer from the University of Innsbruck, who in fact used to be a student at the Pontifical Gregorian University many years ago. It is good to have him here with us again after so many years. So, Josef, over to you.
Thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Lynne Baker from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst in the United States. Professor Lynne Baker is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of the Department of Philosophy of the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. She authored many articles in journals such as the Journal of Philosophy, the Philosophical Review, Philosophy and Phenomenological Research, and Religious Studies. She authored also 5 books, I think more than 5 books, but the most important are Saving Belief, Explaining Attitudes, Persons and Bodies, The Metaphysics of Everyday Life, and Naturalism, and the last book, which appeared in 2013, it's Naturalism and the First Person Perspective. Her paper will be in the direction of the last book, I think. It's on naturalism and the idea of nature.
Thank you very much, Professor Quitterer. Joseph.
Joseph is better. Yeah.
Thank you. Naturalism and the idea of nature. If current analytic philosophy can be said to have a philosophical ideology, it is unquestionably naturalism. So observed the American philosopher Jaegwon Kim. And naturalism has been called the current orthodoxy, at least within Anglo-American philosophy. So said Mario De Caro and David MacArthur. As an orthodoxy, naturalism is a bit odd. It comes in numerous varieties. All varieties of naturalism take nature to be exhaustive of reality, often leaving the idea of what nature is implicit. The dominant form of naturalism in Anglo-American philosophy today is scientific naturalism. Even within scientific naturalism, there are several varieties, depending on how science is construed. Is science just physical science, or does it include all the psychological and social sciences? Either way, all varieties of scientific naturalism share 2 main theses. One, an ontological thesis. What is genuinely real is disclosed by science. And 2, an epistemological or methodological thesis. Science is the only source of knowledge. Naturalism thus has ontological import. Science aims to tell us what genuinely exists as such, what is ineliminable from a complete description of reality. I'll take the ontological and epistemological theses to be definitive of scientific naturalism. After discussing 3 forms of scientific naturalism, I'll turn to the idea of nature that scientific naturalism presupposes, and I'll argue that the presupposed idea of nature is inadequate. It does not include everything in nature. Then I'll consider the possibility that a non-scientific variety of naturalism, liberal naturalism, may succeed where scientific naturalism did not. However, all forms of naturalism suffer from presupposed and unargued for closure principles that limit the scope of reality. Finally, I'll discuss my own view that I call near naturalism, which is not really naturalism. The particular variety of scientific naturalism at issue depends on the way that science is construed. The most stringent variety of naturalism that I know of construes science to be microphysics. On this view, the deliverances of microphysics exhaust reality. Ontologically speaking, there is nothing but what is recommended by microphysics. All else is illusion. I'll call this form eliminative naturalism. A second variety of naturalism is broader. It holds that there are higher level sciences in addition to microphysics, chemistry, biology, psychology, the social sciences, but that they all reduce to microphysics or are reducible to microphysics. I'll call this form reductive naturalism. The most relaxed scientific naturalistic view construes science to include not just physics and what is reducible to it, but all the natural, psychological, and social sciences. This variety takes the sciences to have laws that are not reducible to lower level laws. I'll call this third form of scientific naturalism non-reductive naturalism. I'll consider these in turn. All three of these forms are of scientific naturalism, but to avoid tedium, I'll omit the term scientific in discussing them. So I'll just say non-reductive naturalism instead of non-reductive scientific naturalism. First, and very briefly, turn to the narrowest form of naturalism, eliminative naturalism. This ultra form of naturalism takes nature or reality to be nothing but the point-sized entities and laws recognized by microphysics. All properties and larger entities are thought to be replaceable by local microphysical properties and entities. The putative higher level entities and properties are replaceable by microphysics or microphysical higher level, microphysical entities and properties, point-sized entities and properties. According to eliminative naturalism, everyday entities are eliminable from a complete ontology. Ontology includes known organisms, or what J.L. Austin called medium-sized dry goods. I'll sketch out Alex Rosenberg's somewhat popularized eliminative view here. A more sophisticated eliminative view may be found in Everything Must Go, a Metaphysics Naturalized by Ladyman and Ross. You might suppose that physics is no longer the hegemonic science, that evolutionary biology has caught up with physics. But according to Alex Rosenberg, Darwin's famous discovery of blind variation in natural selection is just, quote, the foresightless play of fermions and bosons producing in us conspiracy theorists the illusion of purpose, end quote. The thermodynamic noise among the molecules present on the Earth about 3 billion years ago, this is a quotation from Alex Rosenberg, the thermodynamic noise among the molecules present on the Earth about 3 million years ago, every so often randomly produced molecules that combined stability with replication, the first sliver of an adaptation produced from zero adaptation, end quote. The process of piling on adaptations upon adaptations is temporally asymmetrical, driven by the second law of thermodynamics, the law that entropy increases almost everywhere, almost all the time. Repeat the process of thermodynamically random variations enough times, quote, and the rest is history, natural history. That's how physics fakes design, says Alex Rosenberg. Moreover, according to Rosenberg, since the second law of thermodynamics is the only law that has a direction from earlier to later, physics shows that Darwin's mechanism is the only one that could drive adaptational evolution in a universe like ours. Quote, If the second law makes Darwinian natural selection inevitable, then the notion that Darwinian natural selection naturalizes purpose has to be surrendered, end quote. Not just in biology, but to core, even in the sciences of man. So Darwin did not just naturalize purpose, Rosenberg says, he annihilated it. Since, ontologically speaking, eliminative naturalism disavows everything but the laws and entities recognized by microphysics, there's a single way around all of life's questions about values, meaning, purpose, or love. The questions make no sense because they all have a false presupposition. Values, meaning, purpose, and love are illusions. Physics has ruled them out. Unsurprisingly, eliminative naturalism leaves us with a pervasive nihilism. Rosenberg says, quote, "Science has to be nihilistic about ethics and morality. There are no moral facts or morally right, just adaptations," end quote. Moreover, on Rosenberg's view, there is no more to mind than what is discovered by neuroscience, which is replaceable by physics. Rosenberg warns that introspection misleads us into supposing that we represent facts about the world in our brains, perhaps in a language of thought, but in fact, Rosenberg says, neuroscience has disproved any such thing. Rosenberg offers what is, in effect, an error theory about everyday life. He says that, quote, "Our plans, projects, purposes, plots, stories, narratives, and other ways we organize our lives and explain ourselves to others and ourselves, indeed, everything that it requires intentionality, are all illusions." Rosenberg does not tell us how it is even possible that we could ever think that we were planning a picnic or writing a narrative if plans and narratives are illusions. Illusions, paradigmatically, are episodes of thinking that things are one way when they actually are another way. If there were no intentionality, you could not direct your thoughts toward anything at all. You could never think, even mistakenly, that things are one way rather than another. How could there be any illusion if there were no intentionality? I want to leave eliminative materialism with a challenge to its advocates. If nature extends no further than bosons and fermions and the like, advocates of eliminative naturalism should tell us in terms of bosons and fermions, the laws of microphysics and so on, how such illusions are even possible. An error theory should show us, with only the resources of microphysics in its illuminative arsenal, how we could ever have made such an error, or indeed how we could have language at all. What is it about bosons and fermions that can give rise to all these illusions? Eliminative naturalists give us no clue. So now let's turn to reductive naturalism. Reductive naturalism aims to show how higher level items, theory, property, entity, and law, may be reduced to lower entity items, where the lower level items are privileged by being closer to physics. For example, when heat is identified with the motion of molecules, the property of being heat is reduced to the property of being motion of molecules, where the property of being motion of molecules is a property found in physics. A reductive naturalism, like John Searle say, holds that there is just one world and that is the world of physics and chemistry. We know independently, says Searle, that the world consists entirely of physical particles and fields of force, end quote. So Searle's ultimate ontology is physicalistic. It comprises only entities, properties, and what have you that are recognized by physics. Nevertheless, Searle endorses what he calls social ontology, according to which social facts are derived from physical facts. I think that it's fair to say that on Searle's view, everything that genuinely exists is either recognized by physics or is reducible to items recognized by physics. Another example of a reductive naturalist is David Papineau, who takes all causally efficacious macro properties to be reducible to properties of physics. Now let's turn to non-reductive naturalism. Non-reductive naturalism is the least stringent variety of scientific naturalism. It affirms that there are genuine properties appealed to by one or more of the sciences that do not reduce to local microphysical properties. I'll consider the views of Hilary Kornblith, a noted non-reductive naturalist. Non-reductive naturalists are open to pluralism about the sciences and hence to pluralism about ontology. Kornblith includes biological, psychological, social, and historical sciences among the successful sciences, whether they are reducible to physics or not. He rejects the idea that physics is the sole determinant of what there is. The suggestion that physics is the sole determinant is not derived from science itself. It couldn't be. Physics doesn't have any law about the extent of physics. And, says Kornblith, the naturalist should not appeal to extra scientific restrictions like limiting ontology to the ontology of physics. However, Kornblith says that the history of the cognitive sciences over the last 50 years seems, quote, to show very clearly that the phenomenology of mental processes is not even roughly reliable in producing an understanding of the mechanisms which actually operate. Note that, according to Kornblith, what is really going on when, say, you decide to paint a landscape are the operations of mechanisms which can be understood without appeal to painting or landscape. Although non-reductive naturalism is much broader in its outlook than eliminative and reductive, its eliminative and reductive cousins, it still limits nature to what is disclosed by one or more of the sciences. For the naturalist, as Kornblith says, there is simply no extra scientific route to metaphysical understanding. The view of nature presupposed is that all reality is in the purview of science, that everyday life can be exhaustively understood in terms of scientific theories. Quotidian events, like making a shopping list, or looking for lost car keys, or accepting an invitation, must be understood in terms of mechanisms that actually operate, and not in terms of what we think we're doing. Science itself becomes a closure principle on reality. One thing that seems agreed on by naturalists is that nature is wholly objective. This is so because science is wholly objective. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, quote, scientific objectivity is a characteristic of scientific claims, methods, and results. It expresses the idea that the claims, methods, and results of science are not or should not be influenced by particular perspectives, value commitments, community bias, or personal interests, to name a few relevant factors. Objectivity is often considered as an ideal for scientific inquiry, as a good reason for valuing scientific knowledge, and as the basis of the authority of science in society, end quote. That is to say, science is non-personal and without any perspective. It is, in Thomas Nagel's memorable phrase, the view from nowhere. Now, Daniel Dennett, for example, a noted naturalist, Daniel Dennett, for example, holds that any theory of first-person phenomena, quote, will have to be constructed from the third-person point of view, since all science is constructed from that perspective, end quote. Dennett has an old piece on the internet called The Fantasy of First-Person Science. Conventional wisdom agrees. First-person phenomena must be eliminated or reduced to third-person phenomena. There are no genuine first-person phenomena in nature, and hence none in reality. So a scientific naturalist must get rid of the appearances that there are irreducible first-person phenomena. Indeed, in his attempt to explain consciousness, Dennett's first step is what he calls Hetero Phenomenology, which paraphrases a subject's first-person expressions as third-person reports of the first person's experience, thus leaving no place in science for anything first-personal. If nature is exhausted by science, as scientific naturalism claims, then no place in science implies no place in nature, which in turn implies no place in reality. I want to argue on the contrary, that nature and hence reality has a personal aspect that is irreducible and ineliminable. There are genuine first-person items, indeed first-person properties that belong in ontology. If so, then the conception of nature presupposed by scientific naturalism is faulty, and hence scientific naturalism is incorrect. Now here's an argument against scientific naturalism. I'll use the word items as a generic term that applies to anything that putatively exists, entities, properties, kinds, aspects, or elements. Now here's the argument. It's on your handout. Premise 1, all science is objective or non-personal. There are no first-personal items in scientific ontology. That is, science does not recognize first-personal phenomena in nature. Premise 2, if first-personal phenomena are neither eliminable nor reducible to naturalistically acceptable properties, then there are genuine first-personal phenomena in nature. I think there's a kind of argument by elimination for that premise. Premise 3, first-personal phenomena are neither eliminable nor reducible to naturalistically acceptable phenomena. I'll argue for that at length in a moment. Therefore, conclusion, intermediate conclusion 4, there are genuine first-personal phenomena in nature. 5, if 1 and 4, then scientific naturalism is false. 6, therefore scientific naturalism is false. Line 1 is insofar as sciences treat first-personal phenomena at all, they treat them only as pragmatic or epistemic, not ontological. And they get first-person phenomena bleached out by science to reveal scientifically acceptable mechanisms and other third-person features. That is to say, reality as science reveals it is wholly objective, hence line 1. That's the argument for line 1. Line 2 is supported by the idea that if we cannot eliminate first-person phenomena altogether, we cannot make them naturalistically acceptable, then there's nothing else that they could be but genuine items. We can turn this idea into an argument. Naturalism is either true or false. If true, then all genuinely real items are either eliminable or reducible to naturalistically acceptable properties. If false, then some genuinely real items are not eliminable or reducible to naturalistically accepted properties. If some genuinely real items are not eliminable or reducible to naturalistically acceptable properties, then these items are in nature, but outside the purview of naturalism, hence line 2. The heart of the argument is line 3. Many first-personal items are neither eliminable nor reducible to naturalistically acceptable phenomena. I'll argue for line 3 first by showing that certain first-personal items cannot be eliminated from nature without loss, then by arguing against reducing first-personal items in some naturalistically acceptable way. Line 4 is just an intermediate conclusion that follows from lines 2 and 3. Line 5 is supported by the construal of scientific naturalism as recognizing all and only the properties that are in nature. So the weight of the argument is line 3. My utterance, here's my argument against premise 3, line 3. My utterance, I am a member of the club, may be considered just a linguistic variation of Lynn Baker, or LB, is a member of the club. Both utterances have the same truth conditions. There is no difference in reality. There's no difference in the facts between I am a member of the club said by Lynn Baker and Lynn Baker is a member of the club said by anybody. That may be, I would respond. But suppose that instead of saying I am a member of the club, I had said I'm glad that I'm a member of the club. The first occurrence of I in the sentence, I'm glad that I'm a member of the club, is the familiar indexical for which any co-referring word, such as Lynn Baker, may be substituted without loss or change of meaning. But the second occurrence of I is not just an indexical for which Lynn Baker, LB, may be substituted without loss or change of meaning. The second occurrence of I also refers to the speaker, but not transparently. It refers to the speaker conceived of as herself in the first person. My point here is an extension of what Hector Castaneda dubbed quasi-indexicals. Moreover, the second occurrence of I expresses a self-concept which is satisfied only by the speaker. A self-concept expresses a dispositional property, a capacity to think of oneself in the first person. We can mark the difference between the I used as indexical and the I that expresses a self-concept by flagging the I that expresses a self-concept with an asterisk. I pronounce that I star. That's on your handout. Just to see what I star is. 4A gives it I as the indexical versus I star, which expresses a self-concept. Both occurrences of the I and the I star refer to the same person. There's not a difference in referent there. The speaker or thinker, the whole embodied person, not to a self or a soul or a mind, although they co-refer, the indexical I is transparent and the I star is not. I and I star have different linguistic roles. I directly refers to the speaker or thinker. I star refers to the speaker by means of a self-concept, the vehicle by which the speaker or thinker conceives of herself as herself. The difference between I and I star captures the difference between making a first-person reference by direct reference and attributing a first-person reference to oneself by means of a self-concept. The I star attributes a first-person reference to the speaker or thinker. An I star utterance is an utterance of a complex first-personal psychological or linguistic sentence with a first-person reference in the that clause. For example, I'm glad that I star, am a member of the club. I call this capacity to conceive of oneself as oneself in the first person the robust first-person perspective. Use of a self-concept ensures that the speaker or thinker has a robust first-person perspective. Someone may suppose that we would not need any I star if we eliminated I. There's a fairly long-standing line of thought that the use of I is eliminable, at least in soliloquy. For example, Peter Geach said that the use of I in soliloquies is redundant and has no special reference. I am very puzzled at this problem really says no more than this problem is puzzling. And Morris Schlick attributed to Lichtenberg the view that, quote, Descartes had no right to start his philosophy with the proposition, I think, instead of it thinks. Similarly, Russell said that Descartes' I think could be paraphrased as there is thinking. Perhaps so, but I regret that I find this problem puzzling, cannot be adequately paraphrased without first-person reference. To suppose that eliminating I would eliminate the robust first-person perspective is a pipe dream. Whether or not I is eliminable in simple first-person sentences, I star is not eliminable from I star sentences. I'm glad that I'm a member of the club is not equivalent to I'm glad that Lynn Baker is a member of the club. Either may be true and the other is false. If I had amnesia, I may still be glad that I'm a member of the club without being glad that Lynn Baker is a member of the club. Alternatively, having read about Lynn Baker as, say, someone who would be an ideal club member, I could be glad that Lynn Baker is a member of the club without being glad that I am. So we would still need the first-personal I star. The robust first-person perspective is essential to what you are saying or thinking. Consider how pervasive the robust first-person perspective is in human life. One central feature of our lives is that we perform actions like signing contracts, pledging allegiance to the flag, making marriage vows, swearing to tell the truth, making commitments. If you make a promise by saying, I promise that I will stay with you until the end, you have performed an act that commits you to certain kinds of future behavior. Your utterance cannot be considered as a wholly indexical utterance. If I were the speaker, the second occurrence of the first-person pronoun, the I, is not an indexical. It's not transparent. It could not be replaced by my initials, Lynn Baker, or by any other non-first-personal designator of me, without changing what I had done. The I star is essential to what I had done, to the act that I had performed by promising. For this utterance to commit me for the future, it has to be, for it to be my promise, I have to be willing to assent to, I promise that I will stay with you till the end. No non-first-person utterance, like Lynn Baker promises that Lynn Baker will stay with you till the end, could be my promise or my vow. It couldn't commit me to the future, to any kind of behavior in the future. In short, a promise manifests a robust first-person perspective that has genuine effects in the world. If first-person phenomena were not manifested in nature, there would be many fewer kinds of action and events in reality than they actually have. To take some random examples, volunteering for a suicide mission, suing the landlord to retrieve one's property, changing one's mind, knowing exactly what one is doing, the list of actions and attitudes that presuppose the robust first-person perspective is endless. So I do not think that naturalists can vindicate a non-first-personal conception of nature by eliminating first-personal elements. Moreover, a third-person account of I star, perhaps in terms of neural mechanisms, would be tantamount to eliminating such phenomena. Someone may object, science can account for all these things in terms of, say, neural mechanisms. So science does not have to leave them out. I reply, this is a non-starter. Neural mechanisms, whatever their causal role, are not first-person perspectives, nor is an account in terms of neural mechanisms an account of a robust first-person perspective. A neural mechanism is located in the brain, but a first-person perspective is a dispositional property of the whole person. It would be impossible for a person in a world without civil suits, landlords, or property to sue the landlord to retrieve her property, no matter what neural mechanisms they may have. Whether or not a dispositional property, like a robust first-person perspective, can be manifested in a certain way depends in part on what world you are in, not just on your neural mechanisms. Since reality would not be what it is without the robust first-person perspective, first-person items cannot be eliminated from nature without loss. On my view, the robust first-person perspective expresses the second stage of a two-stage dispositional property, the disposition to conceive of oneself as oneself in the first person. Elimination of that first-person dispositional property would render the ontology incomplete. To cement the claim that first-person items are indispensable to reality in its fullness, let's turn to two attempts to reduce first-person phenomena to non-first-person phenomena that are naturally acceptable. First, consider John Perry's famous case of the messy shopper, who, unbeknownst to himself, is leaking sugar from his basket in the grocery store. Perry imagines the messy shopper's trail, imagines following the messy shopper's trail until it dawns on him that he himself in the first person is the messy shopper. And that realization changes his behavior to cleaning up the mess. Perry, who claims to have an entirely non-first-personal ontology, explains the situation by saying that the messy shopper had two unlinked notions of himself: his self-notion, a pragmatic epistemic concept, and his messy shopper notion. He changed behavior when the two notions he had of himself became linked. However, Perry offers no non-first-personal account of how they became linked. On the contrary, Perry presupposes a first-person perspective when he explains the linkage between the messy shopper's two notions of himself. Perry says that before the messy shopper can use his objective information about himself, the messy shopper needs, quote, to recognize himself to associate that information with his self-notion. Perry does not, end quote, Perry does not show us how recognizing oneself and associating the information with one's self-notion can be anything but irreducibly first-personal. Not only does Perry not give an objective account of how self-notions and third-person notions become linked, but also on his view, self-notions tell us nothing about reality. They have only a pragmatic epistemic role in how one understands one obtains information. The information so obtained has no first-personal ontological significance. We shouldn't be misled by Perry's calling the messy shopper phenomenon a case of an essential indexical. On his view, quote, all facts are objective facts, end quote. In short, the significance of the first person for psychological explanations is not ontological, but is only epistemic pragmatic. It comes out in the ontological wash of science. Second, consider David Lewis's analysis of de se belief as self-ascription. Lewis aims at a wholly third-personal ontology and so provides an account of objects of belief that is to account for I-star beliefs. On his view, the objects of belief are not propositions but properties. To have a belief is to self-ascribe a property. For example, to believe that many people live in the U.S. is to self-ascribe the property of inhabiting a world in which many people live in the U.S. And to believe that I live in the U.S. is to self-ascribe the property of living in the U.S. Lewis says the de se content of my belief that I have F is just the property F itself. By burying the first-person reference in the idea of self-ascription, Lewis may seem to have found a way to construe the content of a self-belief that eliminates first-person reference. But this is not the case. In the first place, on Lewis's account of self-ascription, any belief whatever, one's non-first-personal belief that many people live in the U.S., any belief entails that the believer conceive of herself as herself in the first person. Otherwise, she cannot self-ascribe any property at all. In the second place, self-beliefs, or what I've called I-star beliefs, are beliefs whereby, Lewis says, I self-ascribe the properties that I think myself to possess. End quote. That's Lewis. But this paraphrase, properties that I think myself to possess, obviously entails a first-person reference. Lewis has not reduced first-person phenomena to naturalistically acceptable phenomena. The phrase, properties I think myself to possess, uttered by Lewis, is not equivalent to properties Lewis thinks Lewis to possess. Neither Perry nor Lewis gives a genuinely non-first-personal account of I-star phenomena. Indeed, I know of no successful account to construe complex first-personal phenomena naturalistically. So I conclude that complex first-personal phenomena are neither eliminable nor reducible to non-first-personal phenomena. Since the robust first-person perspective, the capacity to conceive of oneself as oneself in the first person, is ineliminable and seemingly irreducible to a naturalistically acceptable capacity, I take the capacity to conceive of oneself as oneself in the first person to express a genuine dispositional property that is manifested in thought, speech, and actions. Thus, at last, we have a strong defense of line 3 of this argument against scientific naturalism. And I conclude that the argument is sound. I already gave justification for the other premises. If I am right, then nature itself has a personal aspect, and the objective conception of nature presupposed by scientific naturalists is inadequate. It is important to note the personal aspect that I find in nature is not at all Cartesian. I'm not alluding to Descartes in any way. Perhaps naturalism can be saved by a non-scientific version of naturalism, liberal naturalism. Liberal naturalists, such as Mario De Caro and Alberto Votolini, reject what I called the methodological or epistemological thesis of naturalism. They are willing to admit as philosophically legitimate entities that are ineliminable, but that are not investigated by science, presumably including first-personal properties. So, unlike scientific naturalism, liberal naturalism has room for irreducible and ineliminable first-personal properties, which, as we have seen, are implicit in sound and successful ordinary transactions of ours. That was a quote from De Caro and Votolini. Liberal naturalism wants to go beyond scientific naturalism by, quote, extending the notion of nature beyond scientific nature to fully include the various aspects and normative dimensions of human nature. However, like other naturalists, they balk at anything supernatural. They aim to carve out logical space between scientific naturalism and supernaturalism, where supernaturalism applies not just to divine beings or to entities putatively known by revelation, but to any special modes of understanding that would be irreconcilable with rational forms of understanding. De Caro and Votolini argue strenuously that liberal naturalism does not collapse into any sort of supernaturalism. Now, I agree that it is intuitive to oppose the natural to the supernatural, and all varieties of naturalism share that assumption. I think all varieties of naturalism do. This assumption is really no more than the original characterization of naturalism generally as a philosophical outlook that takes nature as exhaustive of reality, with a more expansive idea of nature. Since rejection of the supernatural is assumed from the outset, however, the exclusion of the supernatural seems to be another unargued for closure principle on reality. So now let's turn to my view. Whereas liberal naturalism rejects the supernatural altogether, Near naturalism, that's my view, near naturalism brackets questions about anything supernatural. If God did create the world, he created it to be intelligible to human beings on its own terms. Near naturalism takes as its domain what I call natural reality, which includes entities, properties, and kinds that came into being through natural processes of nature or through the intentions of human beings. It simply does not raise any questions about anything transcendent or supernatural. It's a quietistic view on that with respect to anything supernatural. There are several important differences between my near naturalism and genuine naturalism of any stripe. One, genuine naturalism is a metaphysical view that takes what I'm calling natural reality to be the whole of reality. Near naturalism is a metaphysical view limited to natural reality and is quiet about anything transcendent. So the domains of scientific naturalism, liberal naturalism, and near naturalism are similar, i.e. natural reality construed differently by each. However, as we have seen, both scientific naturalism and liberal naturalism impose closure principles on reality. Near naturalism, by contrast, imposes no closure principles on reality. My view leaves open the question of whether natural reality is all that there is. Two, unlike scientific naturalism, near naturalism incorporates the first-person perspective as ineliminable and irreducible, and thus is part of fundamental reality. It is a dispositional property belonging in ontology. So, near naturalism takes reality to have an irreducible personal aspect. Three, near naturalism is a form of what I call practical realism. Practical realism takes the world of medium-sized objects, persons, animals, and artifacts to be basic entities as genuine as electrons. While accepting science, near naturalism, like liberal naturalism, does not take science to be the exclusive arbiter of reality. Near naturalism aims to be a metaphysics that includes the common sense world that we all encounter and interact with every day. Near naturalism is naturalistic in an old-fashioned way. Although it is inconsistent with the known laws of nature, it is not guided by or derived from science. To say that I accept science is to say that I take any established claim of any of the sciences to be true, but this is not to say that I am beholden to any particular philosophical interpretation of such claims. Although near naturalism has room for inquiry into reality beyond what is natural, it does not appeal to anything supernatural. The world pictured by near naturalism is notably humane and expansive. Now, conclusion. I have tried to clear the path for near naturalism by removing a priori barriers, the closure principles, like no first-person reality, imposed by naturalists on nature, constraints that serve to constrict reality rather than to illuminate it. The idea of nature underlying near naturalism is of whatever it takes to have a complete account of natural reality, where by natural reality I mean non-transcendent reality. Near naturalism is simply silent about whether natural reality is all that there really is. The near naturalism that remains gives on to a generous reality with ontological room for us and our first-person perspectives. From the point of view of near naturalism, the everyday world, the world of getting and spending and of laying waste our powers, is as real as it gets. This capacious world, more English garden than desert landscape, is natural enough. Thank you.